Who cares what they say? We're gonna do it our way, like Sinatra or Burger King. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of I Like to Read with me, your host, Rachel Polanski. Was just jamming out a little bit in my head to some songs from the new hit Peacock show, Girls 5 Eva. Truly obsessed. It all came out on Thursday. Whenever this comes out. Also, apologies for the random drop schedule. Hopefully, better late than never. Sometimes we just take a little bit longer with editing and other things and life gets in the way, but we're getting it to you eventually, and better late than never. Girls 5 Ever, freaking fantastic. It is the story of a 2000s girl group band named Girls 5 Eva. The band is made up of the incredible Busy Phillips, Paula Pell, and Renee Elise Goldsberry, who's probably best known as Angelica, I think, from Hamilton. Not really a Hamilton stan here, but she has an incredible voice, so if you're like a huge Hamilton musical fan, you'll love this. And then rounded out by, why am I blanking on who Sarah Bareilles, of course. So it's like got this great mix of actual musical joy and like the chemistry between the cast and the band members, while also being, this sort of funny social commentary on what it was like to be a girl group and just sort of like a product of the machine in the early 2000s. It is produced by Tina Fey, created by Maria Scordano, I am butchering that. Now I need to look it up. And so anyways, the songs in it are like freaking bangers. They released a soundtrack with most of the songs from the show that kind of just appear in snippets or flashbacks. A couple of the songs are played in full on the show, but either way, the soundtrack has been fueling me. I already want to rewatch the show. There's 8 episodes and they're each under 30 minutes, so they're pretty quick, but there's a lot packed into them. So even though I tried my best to pay full attention and absorb it all, I'm definitely due and ready for a rewatch. Now let me just get the creator's name. Meredith Scardino. I was close. It's also the Tina Fey and her husband Jeff Richmond, who are the composing and musical duo behind Mean Girls, the musical, which is also a fan fave, and Erica Henningsen and Ashley Park, who are the OG Katie and Gretchen, respectively, in the Mean Girls musical, which I have still yet to see live, but will one day. They are both also in it for reasons I won't explain, but they're part of the original Girls 5 Eva, and so they appear on the soundtrack quite a few times, and it's just in my head and fun and inspiring me to do some unironic but ironic TikToks, which is a whole other thing that we don't have to get into. Anyways, but the beauty of releasing these episodes a little bit later and recording a little bit later in the week is that we sometimes get 6 books instead of 5 books. One, because I have read more than 7 books sometimes by the time I record, just because I've kind of just been doing it a little more sporadically as opposed to having a set schedule, which kind of actually ends up working better for me. I don't feel obligated and tied and feeling like I have to do it or edit or record and have a specific moment. So if you're used to them coming out on Sundays, maybe we'll get back to that. But for now, just stay tuned, and it's kind of a surprise when it's gonna drop in your feed or in your subscription box. So yes, we get 6 books. I'm going to tie 2 together, the first 2, simply because they both are this sort of light mystery, rom-com-y type. One is definitely a little more mystery focused. One's a little more romance focused. They are both told from stories of first-generation American women whose families have immigrated from other countries, and they are also written by women who have had similar experiences, and then the titles just kind of match together. So you'll see where I'm going with this. The first one that I have to talk about for you is Dial A For Aunties by Jess Q. Sutanto, and I hope I am not butchering that. I apologize. So this one is just a fun novel. Madeline Chan is our main character. She has this group of aunties who have come from the Chinese Indonesian culture that she has grown up in. They moved to America. They all have their own children. She is involved in her family. They are just constantly trying to set her up. She's been single for a long time because she had a heartbreak from, what was it? This isn't Liam. I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, right. I'm trying to remember. Basically, it's sort of like a Agatha Christie situational comedy gone, what else can go wrong? Long story short, she goes on a first date with a guy that her aunts have set her up with. Circumstances lead her to accidentally killing him. other circumstances lead him to accidentally, like, his body traveling with them on the island that they've traveled to help with a catering situation. So she's thrown into this sort of like high pressure, high stakes wedding situation, made all the fact worse by the fact that there's a dead body. Both of these stories definitely, you know, deal with murder and deal with crime in a lighter manner, but I think because they're so self-aware, because they are so tongue-in-cheek and like meant to be light while still, I mean, often the people, you know, spoiler alert, that the people who die in these two books are, you know, not exactly the best people. That doesn't necessarily justify their death, but it's usually some sort of like, you know, the death is, these characters are really just nothing more than a plot point, and they're fiction. You know, they're not based on anything real. They are purely fun, imaginative escapism. So that one was definitely a little more fun and focused on the romance between the main character, Medi, and her trying to navigate running into her ex-love from college and this sort of secret romance that she hid from her family. Now her family is extremely involved in her life, literally in this present moment, because they are trying to help figure out what to do with this body and with this murder. And both of these stories, you know, obviously are, because they're this escapism, magical fantasy, tie up in a nice little bow, but not so nicely, because I think both of these are the first to the start of a series. This one is they both like had excerpts of the next one coming, which is great because that means they're already on the way. So that's Dial A for Aunties. The next one is Arsenic and Adobo. You'll see they're both just sort of like A for A's. And then before I forget, by Mia P. Manansala. Again, sorry if that is the wrong pronunciation. This one is also based around food, also based around a love of family and the messes you get into and the ties that bind you and the secrets that are far more important than like actually, you know, doing what's right in your heart versus like sometimes what your head might logically say, but like, you know, that your family is like stronger than anything. So this one is just a little more focused on the murder concept, because as opposed to like the first one, Dial A for Aunties, where it's the wedding is happening and then the murder is sort of tangential and misses that up. Here the murder is the main focus, but the murder is messing up everything else because Lila's family, our main character, she works and helps run Tita Rosie's kitchen, and her aunts are all involved with that as well. Except in this series, they are can't speak. One of another ex comes into her past. This time he's murdered at their restaurant. That sets off a bunch of sort of repercussions and other murders and twists and turns. Lila and her family are suspects, of course, because it happened at their restaurant. Because both of these stories are told from the protagonist's point of view, you know, we understand and know that they didn't do it. And of course, there's not going to be a twist in that aspect, but it is kind of fun to, you know, play whodunit and play detective along with our protagonists who are literally trying to clear their names or trying to like bring the truth and justice to light. And it's in this case, you know, because there was a murder that happened at their store, at their restaurant, they're already behind on bills. It pretty much comes down to either they have to solve the murder and figure out what happened, or they lose their restaurant and sort of their whole life. Lila is very well developed. She has a super fun, cute little dog named Longancia, which I, again, butchering the pronunciation, but that's how you say sausage in Filipino, and she has a sausage, sausage wiener dog, Longancia, which she calls Nisa, Longanisa, please correct me if I'm wrong, which I probably am. Longanisa, her dog son Nisa, who's like this cute little chubby friend who just like follows her around, adorable. So yeah, there's murder. Yeah, there is that darker theme, but it doesn't get into any of the gruesome details with that. They're much more fun, humorous, using the murder as a plot device for us to get to know these characters and their surrounding families. And kind of shifting completely away from the sort of lighter fun, this is definitely a darker novel that I'm about to talk with, but still just as cool and nuanced and dynamic. We have The End of Men by Christina Sweeney-Baird. So this is sort of looked at as a archaeological and anthropological and sort of archaeological, but more sociological and anthropological study of what happens to a society that is affected by a plague very similar to what we went through with coronavirus, but also very different. You'll see why in a second, because as the title states, The End of Men, all of a sudden in Glasgow, we have a woman who works in a hospital, and this is 2025 also, so it's very near to the future. I think also the author, who is only a year older than I am, which is like crazy how she wrote this fantastic novel. But she did start writing it before the pandemic. It just happened to kind of come out now and coincide with a lot of the fears and things we're experiencing in real life. But the virus quickly becomes a global pandemic that is affecting only the male population. So pretty much 95% of the population of men dies and passes away. And so what's great about this novel, and what I think is very different and engaging, is it not only deals with this sort of dystopian pandemic that also feels very real, that was certainly prevalent in fiction and novels before COVID, is definitely made much more aware, but it deals with the pandemic and as it's actually happening, but then it also deals with how society rebuilds itself, and really the sort of circle that's incomplete with, starting from the very first virus incident, the very first deaths, and tracing how that came, to adapting to a world mostly without men, and how the different people and the different women whose perspectives we get different women's perspectives from all over the world. When we get the perspective of one of the women who's helping to develop the vaccine, we get the perspective of one of the women who is developing, how to keep newborn babies alive. We get the perspective of a woman who is on the front line. So we get all these different women and their different perspectives all over the world, and see how the virus is treated differently, but also very similar. It's really just, while there is a lot of loss and hard stuff and topics at the beginning, there is this sense of resilience and what happens when people come together and have to deal with this massive trauma, but still have to go on and live their lives. And I think that this is a really interesting take on it now that we're sort of in the tail end of the pandemic and things are hopefully trending upwards. It's interesting to look back and see what a similar but not too similar pandemic, and how a different fictional world and society deals with it. It's, the comparisons and the differences, are fascinating, and it's, crazy to think that it could happen to anybody, just like coronavirus could happen to anybody. Although in this case it was just men, and I'm not a man, but to think what a world without men would be like and how it would come about is really interesting and well thought out in this one. And next we have White Magic by Elissa Washuta. This was just a really great collection of short essays and personal vignettes written by Elissa Washuta. Some of them are more personal essays, more explorations into her white identity and sort of her white-facing identity. She presents as white, but does have, I believe her family is Native American, and she deals with sort of what it's like to grapple with those dual identities. She also, takes that sort of personal aspect of her identity, tracing it all the way back to colonization and how women were othered, and how also the instances of witchcraft appear, and how magic is even, alienated, magic is, put into these categories of black and white, just like race, and how that's perceived, and how her own personal magical journey, she considers herself a witch, but in a very cool way. I mean, I wouldn't by any means, the title says White Magic. She considers herself a witch. I would definitely say this is a witchy book. Of course, there's Stevie Nicks praise throughout it, but there's also a really cool, fictional Oregon Trail, what happens in a dystopian Oregon Trail novel, and what happens when Twin Peaks is your favorite show and influences a lot of your life and your writing and sort of seeps into your consciousness. Well, if any of that intrigues you, it's definitely a little bit of a longer one. I believe it was around 400 pages. It's not exactly telling me. But again, because it is essays that all flow together, you can definitely pick it up, read an essay, half of an essay, put it down, head on over to a fictional novel that I'm going to be talking about in a second, and then, sort of go back and forth. So you can dabble in white magic. You don't have to go all the way in at first. And next we have The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave. This is a good old-fashioned thriller that's definitely darker and less focused on the romance aspect and more on the personal growth and development. Not that that doesn't happen in the other ones, but more of much more the crime is nuanced and developed because in our story, The Last Thing He Told Me, there is a man named Owen Michaels. He is married to our protagonist, Hannah. Owen is missing. And, that's sort of a classic. At first, I was like, okay, well, how many stories start off with, the wife doesn't know where the husband is, and it turns into some whole, espionage thing, and, he was laundering money, something sort of like a basic, neatly wrapped bow. And while the case does certainly take elements of that aspect, it plays with them in a really nice way that focuses more on the relationship between Hannah and Owen and their past and why Owen chose to be with Hannah and hide certain things, but also reveal certain things in unexpected ways. There's also a lot of really great development between Hannah and her stepdaughter, Bailey, who Owen left in Hannah's care. We find out, Hannah is, of course, the number one suspect. She sort of takes things into her own hands, takes Bailey along with her. So the journey that they go through together to figure out this missing man's past, and this missing man who was a father to a young girl, Bailey, who is 16 at the time, and just sort of recounting instances from her childhood that she's repressed and things that are coming to the light. So there's all those really heavy things surrounding just the typical, like what happened to Owen. Of course, that's like the main focus of this, but it's really about these two women at different points in their lives who at the start of the novel really were in a frayed relationship, and because this man is missing, now have to try to fix that and put that together. And of course, there are some twists and turns with the central, what happened to Owen? Why is he missing? Why do they have to go on this journey? All of that is really well developed and thought out. And I definitely just kept reading it very speedily and wanted it to soak in while also being okay, I need to know sort of what happened. And it gives you as good as a resolution as you would expect from this well-written book. And last but certainly not least, we have a bit of an older favorite. And by older, I mean 1998. We're delving back to the late 90s. We have The Tribes of Palos Verdes by Joy Nicholson. So this was actually made into a movie 4 years ago, and I haven't yet seen it, but I think either a trailer for the movie or something about this book showed up somewhere, and I was like, that sounds cool. Why haven't I read it? And it's a very sparse novel, but a lot goes on. When I first read it, at first it almost the words take a little bit to sink in, and the characters take a little bit to sink in, and at first it makes you uncomfortable. The main character, Medina Mason, is very weird and awkward, and she is our lens into the tribes of Palos Verdes. The titular tribes are actually surfing tribes, and surfing is how she forms her way into the community when she doesn't feel comfortable at school. She has a very fractured family. Her parents moved them to Palos Verdes to sort of start over, and her father is a very prominent doctor, and her mother is going through a lot of mental health issues, and those mental health issues become very present with her physical appearance, and that causes her children to have a lot of embarrassment. There's also a really weird twist. There's just this weird relationship between Medina and her brother, who is such a fractured character, and her brother has such a weird, twisted, Norman Batesy relationship with his mom, but you also just see him desperately wanting to get out, and you see how Medina is a lot stronger in that aspect of resisting the pull of her toxic parents and trying to forge her own path, but also just a confused 16-year-old girl who's just falling in love for the first time and learning how to surf and just trying to be a young girl in California while dealing with this horrible mess of her family. And I am now excited to watch the movie. Maybe you've read it if you have read it before, since this is probably the oldest book I've talked about so far on the podcast. That's a first. Let me know your thoughts. If you've seen the movie, let me know your thoughts. Maybe I'll watch it soon. It's on my list. I just, have so much to watch. She's written another book too, which I bought, which came out in the past 10 years or so. Haven't read that yet. Just, again, so much to read, but I'll get there. But check that out if you haven't already, or if you read it 1998, 2008, 23 years ago when it did first come out, maybe revisit it and see how much you've changed. And even though the text is the same, what you can pull from it a second read. So we got the afternoon vibes of craziness and all over the place, but I hope you enjoyed and can take at least one of these books with you to read at your next whim. And until next time, stay reading. Bye.